Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and welcome to another of our Ironworkers Impact National Safety Calls. We want to thank you for joining us. We think we've got a really great topic today. The topic is going to be special training requirements and issues pertaining to multiple lift rigging procedures, controlled deck zone, and connector procedures. These are some things that have really gotten some confusion out there in the industry and what's going on as you move from OSHA national to state OSHAs and things of that nature. As we go through the webinar, I'm going to ask if you have questions please use the question and answer tab. We won't be able to monitor the chat tab. Wayne Crestup, who normally does that, is out today. He's having surgery on his eye. So Wayne, our thoughts and prayers are with you. And with that, as always, General President Eric Dean is going to have an opening statement for us. So Eric, if you would.
Good morning or good afternoon. You got me on there, Christy, or do I got to do something?
No, we see you.
Okay, good, very good. So for everyone on the call, I always start out by thanking you for taking the time and interest of either your employees, our members, or if you're a labor leader, taking the time to devote to safety. Every time Steve and Pete have these calls, we try and delve into a subject that's topical, current, and maybe a problem or a nuisance. So I'm going to go back to something I've been writing in the Ironworker magazine for a long period of time. Social scientists predicted that 40% of the workforce were baby boomers and they were leaving the industry. So what that does is that constantly makes us have to reinforce through the Ironworkers Union our training on steel erection procedures. Not only does it have to make us do that reinforcing, but we also have to do company safety. People are changing every day. And so too are the OSHA regulators. And to have consistency from the way we've trained through Subpart R, especially as it relates to multiple lift rigging procedures. You get a newly trained safety person or safety regulator, and they don't necessarily know what has been agreed to by the regulatory agencies, what our training is, and what the standard is. So we're revisiting things because we're kind of seeing an inconsistency in how it's being interpreted. Not only that, the controlled decking zone, where you tie off, where you protect the workers, and the connector procedures. There are some things that are tried and true through Subpart R that we've gone through and negotiated the rulemaking with OSHA and with stakeholders. And what happens is, it's kind of like when a new business agent gets on and they want to redefine jurisdiction, or a new contractor gets in and they don't understand the collective bargaining agreement. This is not that. This is standardized steel erection, the regulatory environment we work in. I do want to tell you, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you, I'm attending with Bill Dean the Boilermakers Tripartite Annual Conference. It's the first one they've had since COVID, and we were invited guests because we're a similar trade and we rig and we weld. And I was so pleased to hear that they reported 0 job site fatalities to date this year. I pray for their trade that stays that way, and I know that the ironworkers in our union, we aspire every day to bring everyone home as safe as possible, intact, the way they went to work, with no disability or disabling injuries, and God forbid, no fatalities. So the issues that Steve's going to talk about today are just keeping us on the same page, not getting us on the same page. That page has been written, printed, and understood. We do have from time to time, OSHA will write a compliance directive that varies the standards of where we teach in every apprenticeship training center, and we have to reel those folks back in. So recently, Steve and I met with the Department of Labor to talk about that compliance directive and the interpretation, or the new interpretation, or the different interpretation. And it's frustrating because this is something my predecessor and my predecessors and their predecessors, Steve's predecessors, and all the employers on, we've been through this, and to have to relearn this or kind of pull the regulatory agency in to get us all on the same page. And so that's what today is about, steel erection and the challenges of people trying to redefine what's been established. So Steve's going to go back over what's been mutually agreed to, what's the industry standards, and how do we achieve worker safety in the steel erection process as it relates to multiple lift rigging, controlled decking zones, and the work a connector does. Steve, I thank you for what you always do. And Pete, I thank you for willing to co-host this and always be there. I have some meetings with the leadership of the Boilermakers with Bill Dean. So I'm not going to be on the call for the entire call, but I'm going to put my screen on mute and my camera off, but I'm going to stay as long as I can until my meeting here, and I got to meet at about 1 o'clock our time. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, for that. We appreciate that intro, and I will second everything Eric said. He said it far more eloquently than I probably can, but those are things we're going to do our best to address today. Again, as you have questions, we're going to do our best to get them answered. I would ask that you use the question and answer tab. So with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Rank, someone I'm sure most all of you know and know well, but he is Executive Director of Safety and Health for the Ironworkers International. He's held that post for a long time, and he is a walking encyclopedia of safety for ironwork and the general industry. So Steve, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pete. Can everyone see the screen?
I believe we can.
Okay, good. And I also like to thank General President Dean for his time and his support for ironworker safety and helping our contractors get on the same page. And, you know, without the top brass support for these regulatory issues and to play offense, we would be on our heels dealing with these same problems and not resolving them. So I want to thank him personally for all his support. Well, we have three issues today that keep raising their ugly head. And these are issues that have been in print since 2001, whenever the ironworkers and the NEA forced OSHA to use negotiated rulemaking to rewrite the Subpart R steel erection standards. And these are three specific standards that we negotiated with them. However, they require special training requirements. And that is something that we all got to keep and maintain, that any employee you have on the payroll that does multiple lift rigging, connecting, or decking, you have to make damn sure that you got the documentation to back it up. And you can do that using Lee Worley's National Training Fund, the Apprenticeship Tracking System. If you don't have that, get a hold of Lee, because he has it looks like a driver's license with the photograph of every member. And on that Apprenticeship Tracking System card has every program that our members have been trained on. Owners accept it, general contractors accept it, and let's hope these safety people that are uneducated, as General President Dean said, they're unfamiliar with these standards, will also accept the fact that we provided training on these three subjects. So here's a brief history. It was the ironworkers that led the charge to rewrite the steel erection standards. It was not OSHA. The subjects you're going to see here today are things that we fought for as the ironworking industry. We want to put more than one piece of iron on the hook. We want concessions for connectors when they're dealing with live loads and they're out of sight from the crane operator. And we want some concessions when it does leading edge work when we do decking. So we fought hard to get those things through negotiated rulemaking. And something we all need to understand is OSHA didn't like that. They got overruled with a 20-0 vote, and we came to consensus. And so these three items that you're going to see here today were part of a consensus standard, okay? So OSHA didn't like it. As General President Dean said earlier, they will write compliance directives or interpretation letters. They lost the war, but they're trying to win the battle to these stupid, misguided compliance directives that confuse everybody. Okay, so we're going to go over a few of these. But keep in mind, some project safety personnel have excluded multiple lift rigging from the contracts. They've excluded exemptions for connectors between 15 and 30 feet. And they've also excluded the use of controlled decking zones. So before we get into any scraps with any generals or owners, you got to look at that contract safety document to see if they have excluded this from the contractor. If not, you are in full swing to implement these in accordance with the OSHA standards. Okay, the issues that we're going to talk about today have resulted in costly job site delays, unfortunately, because some regulatory people didn't understand it, and neither did some new young safety people coming up through the ranks. So there's a lot of misconceptions that we're going to go through today. The first one deals with multiple lift rigging. And I can tell you that the Department of Labor and OSHA people think this is the most unsafe thing in the world to put more than one piece of iron on a hook. Okay? Simply
Steve,
not. Yes.
Steve, I don't want to interrupt, but I don't believe we're seeing your screen share, your presentation.
Oh, okay.
Nope.
I'm sorry. Let me back up here. 1 second. I'm trying to get back to this, Pete.
I wasn't sure when you were going to start, but I realized that you were.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were already. I'm trying to get back to the share screen here, Christy. And okay, here. Okay. Tell me when you got it. Do you have it now?
We do. It's
okay.
Showing it in that presentation mode.
Okay. Let me start it from. Can you see it now?
There it is. Looks
Okay.
great. Thank you.
I'm sorry. These are the 3 issues we're going to talk about that require special training that we negotiated from. This is a brief history that I talked about, that we fought to get these for our contractors and our members. And so now you still see the slide, correct? Okay. The first one is multiple lift rigging. It's hated by a lot of OSHA people. They think that this is the most unsafe way to do it, but there's a safe way to do it and there's an unsafe way to do it. You can hoist one piece of iron unsafely if you don't rig it right. So here is the requirement for special training on multiple lift rigging. You're looking at it right here. The employer has to ensure that each one of our iron workers who performs multiple lift rigging is trained in the following areas: the nature of hazards associated with multiple lifts and the proper procedures and equipment to perform the lifts. So that's it in a nutshell, but now we're going to look at some specific examples here. But here are some specific misconceptions that I'm getting feedback from the field constantly. Some people are saying the crane manufacturers prohibit more than one piece of iron being on the load block. That's BS. As long as whatever you got on that hook is within the rated capacity and the configuration of that crane, you can put 5,000 pounds on the hook on one piece or 2 pieces at 2,500 pounds each. So that is completely incorrect that crane manufacturers prohibit having more than one piece of iron on the hook. It is not in their technical publication manuals, nor would they sell any cranes to Pete Hayes or any of you other steel erectors if they put it in their manuals that you can only put one piece of iron on a hook. You wouldn't buy their crane. So that's false. And that keeps coming up from these young safety folks that thinks it's a violation of the manufacturer's recommendations. The second fallacy and misconception that we're going to talk about today is there's only one rigging assembly that's allowed to comply with the OSHA standard. Simply not true. We're going to show you 3 common rigging assemblies that are used from coast to coast, and you can pick whatever one that you want. But it's incorrect that there's only one way to do it. Number 3, each structural member must be independently rigged to the load block. Simply not true. This stemmed from a great big association meeting where probably 2,000 safety people were told that the only way you can do this is to have independent lines coming from the head ball all the way down to each piece. Simply not true. The next misconception is only certified riggers can perform the multiple lift rigging procedure. Again, not true. It's a qualified rigger. It's not a certified rigger, a fortified rigger, a bona fide rigger. It's a qualified rigger, and it's peppered throughout the standard. But this whole certification thing has spilled over into multiple lift rigging, and they're telling our contractors that you have to be certified to do this. You may, if it's in the contract, but once again, you got to look at that contract, but the standard does not require a certified rigger. It requires a qualified rigger per the definition. I see we have a question here in the chat box, Pete. Hello, Pete.
Yeah, I'm here. Can we please discuss reinforcing steel is the question.
Okay. I'll bring that up real. It's my next bullet point down here, a couple more. I'll get to that in just a second.
Great.
The next fallacy and misconceptions is only wire rope slings can be used and synthetic slings are prohibited. Not true. Not true. But we'll go with that and show you some examples here shortly. So here comes your rebar question, Pete. The multiple lift rigging can be used to hoist bundles of rebar. No, you can't. Not under the multiple lift rigging procedure. That's only for structural steel members under subpart R steel erection. Rebar is under subpart Q under concrete and masonry work, okay? Now, you can hoist multiple bundles of rebar from the truck on top of the building, provided that no employee is ever working beneath a suspended load. Once again, you can put 5 bundles of rebar on the truck, rig them 2 or 3 feet apart, put tag lines on it, and hoist it from the truck all the way up on the top deck of that building all day long. The only thing you got to remember is at no time can an employee be working underneath a suspended load. That's the only thing that prohibits rebar from being hoisted in multiple bundles. Are we clear on that? Third, lastly, workers must walk to the end of the beam before hoisting on the multiple lift rigging procedure. Not true. There's a provision you're going to see here that only employees that are engaged in the hooking and unhooking of steel are allowed to be underneath a suspended load. Okay? So you don't have to hook it up and walk to the end of the beam and get up on the load. Not true. It's not in the standard. This is an issue that we're fighting right now with a state-approved OSHA plan that got it completely wrong, and we're going to correct this issue before it gets worse. So these are just some of the misconceptions, and I wanted to ask the crowd, Pete, is there any other misconceptions that we need to share with the crowd that's happening in the field that we're hearing from project safety people or owners or general contractors or consultants or whatever? Do we have any other issues other than these common misconceptions on the screen right here?
I will keep monitoring the Q&A box to see if anybody brings that in.
Okay. Next thing is the selection and use of a manufactured rigging assembly. If you want to do this, it has to be a manufactured rigging assembly. And here is the black and white requirements, okay? It has to be designed and assembled with a maximum capacity for the total assembly and for each individual attachment point. The capacity has to be certified by the manufacturer or a qualified rigger, and it has to be based on the manufacturer's specification of a 5-to-1 safety factor. So as long as your slings, your bull tails, your eye hoisting hooks, and your shackles are all rated like from Crosby, those are manufactured rigging components that you can use off the shelf, and you can use those interchangeably to do a multiple lift at any time. And once again, a qualified rigger shall inspect this, not a certified rigger, a fortified rigger, but a qualified rigger, okay? So this is it about the components and also reinforcing the qualified rigger. So here's something that's got to be done prior to each shift is, once again, a qualified rigger has to inspect the rigging equipment, okay? Not a certified rigger. But this is what you're going to get asked for. And we had a couple cases where some OSHA people came up to our hook-on guys who were great riggers, and they asked them, how many broken wires is the maximum amount before you have to remove those slings from service? And they couldn't tell them. All they said was, well, if there's one broken wire, then I'll cut it in half. But that's not what the OSHA compliance guy asked for. He says, what's the removal criteria for broken wires in a wire rope sling? So what you see on the screen here, this is the anatomy of a wire rope sling. You have a wire, a strand, then you have the core, and you have the complete wire rope. So who can tell me out in the crowd how many broken wires are required for removal of a wire rope sling? Can anyone jump in the chat box for a free pizza today? Tell me, what is
Steve, while we were waiting for an answer to that, we do have a couple questions. See if anybody wants that pizza. The first one goes back to rebar. It says Cal OSHA is saying otherwise about multiple rebar bundles. Is this something we can address?
Yeah, we can address that. As long as no one's working beneath a suspended load, you can put 50 bundles of rebar on that hook. And I can get that clarified through the Research and Standards Department today, okay? But you can't just hook up a bunch of rebar bundles and fly it over everyone's head, because there could be all kinds of problems stemming from that. But if you ask them a very specific question, Pete, and to the person asking this question, as long as there's no employees subject to working beneath a suspended load, show me where I can't hoist 4 bundles of rebar from the truck to the top deck, and they can't do it. And it's not a violation, okay? So California, OSHA get their wildcats in different regions across the state, but we've got a great relationship with their Research and Standards unit that's based in Oakland, California. And if someone wants to send me a question and their telephone number, I'll get with them after the call today, and we'll take care of this and nip it in the bud. How's that sound?
Sounds like a good one. Okay. Next question, and this is an interesting one. If you have an engineered rigging plan for a multiple lift rigging procedure for something that isn't structural steel, is that acceptable? So I'm assuming maybe they're talking rebar bundles or something else.
The standard only applies under subpart R to structural beams or similar structural members. It could be channel iron, okay? But no, you just can't pick and choose anything you want to use to do multiple rigging with, like rebar. I've even heard of them stringing 3 or 4 Johnny on the spot outhouses, and I got called on that. And no, the standard is very specific to steel erection, but other trades are trying to do it, whether they're doing plywood, formwork, lumber, piping, because they want to take advantage of crane time and get as much off the truck like we do. But they don't have a standard that regulates them and allows them to do that. So that's why these questions are being asked. Okay, we can do it in the steel erection under our standards, but they can't. So any other materials other than structural steel, you're in for a fight. Okay. So
All right. So we've got multiple answers here on your question. 3 in a rope lay, 5 in a strand, 10 in a lay, 6 wires and 1 rope. Here's 3 in a lay again, or 3 in 1 strand. So we're getting multiple. That's just in the Q&A box. If I go to the chat box, we're getting a whole bunch here as well. So a lot of different answers.
Yes, there are. Well, the 5 one is wrong. It used to be 5 and 10. 5 broken wires per strand in a 1 rope lay, and 10 randomly broken wires in a 1 rope lay. And you see on the picture here, this 1 rope lay here, that's the distance it takes that 1 strand to make 1 complete revolution. And in that distance, you cannot, and here's the answer, you cannot have any more than 3 broken wires per strand in a 1 rope lay, or 6 randomly broken wires in any strands in a 1 rope lay. So the answer is 3 and 6. The answer is 3 and 6. 3 broken wires per strand in a 1 rope lay, and 6 randomly broken wires in a 1 rope lay. So Pete, who gets the pizza?
Well, we've got 2 that say 3 in a rope lay, but they don't mention 6. We do have one person who mentions 6 wires and 1 rope, but doesn't mention the 3. So I'll let you decide who gets to win the pizza, because nobody's got it quite the way you worded it.
Well, all 3 of them are half right, so they'll have to split that pizza 3 ways. Just
all right, we'll write their names down.
Just remember, guys, it's 3 and 6, baby. It's 3 and 6. Just remember 3 and 6. And your hook on guys better know 3 and 6, because they're going to get asked. Okay, it's 3 and 6. One last point, Pete. It's the same removal criteria for running ropes on a crane, so it makes sense. And I agree with OSHA. If it's good enough to remove a running rope at 3 broken wires and 6 in 1 rope lay, why wouldn't it be good enough to remove a wire rope sling that we're putting on beams on a 40-story building used over and over again? So I agreed with OSHA when they updated the OSHA standards to reflect 3 and 6 instead of 5 and 10, because it coincides with the running rope removal criteria for cranes. So just remember 3 and 6 and have that as a safety topic on all your job sites. Any other questions, Sir Pete?
Yeah, we've got one. What are tagline links when you have multiple lift rigging?
There's nothing that requires a tagline to be used during multiple lifts. There is a requirement that says taglines shall be used at the discretion of a qualified rigger. Okay? So if Pete Hayes is the hook-on man, and if Pete thinks that he needs to put a tagline on it so he can pull down on it and put it in my hands to get it up through the bay, then that's what should be done. But that should be done at the discretion of a qualified rigger, and you don't have to put taglines on everything because you think it's going to make it safer. It's a tool, and it'll be used at the discretion of someone that's going to use it when it's needed. Okay? Quick example. There was a project that required taglines on everything, even offloading trucks. And we warned them about this, that it could get snagged and all that. It wasn't 4 months later, and an iron worker lost 3 fingers on his right hand because the rope got stuck, around his right hand when the crane was swinging, offloading iron, and it jerked real hard, and it pulled 3 fingers off of his right hand. The next week, I walked right back into that job site trailer, and the first thing I said was, "I told you so." Okay, I told you that taglines should be used at the discretion of a qualified rigger. But when we're offloading stuff from trucks, from the truck to the ground, it makes no sense because we've got our hands on the very end of the load, and we don't want taglines catching up on stuff as they go through the air. They get caught between the beam to column connections, that short gap there. If there's anything for it to catch up on, we've learned it'll catch. And it has. And when it catches, it reacts violently. And when that happens, you too could also lose fingers like a member in Northern California did. So to answer that question, taglines are not required to use during multiple lift rigging unless specified in your contract safety document that all safety people better review.
There, you just answered another question someone had asked if the contractor can specify that. So the answer is yes.
Yes, sir. Correct. Okay.
We've got one other
ahead.
one here. Somebody's asking if these apply in Canada. I think the answer to that is no. We do Canadian specific calls. This is regarding OSHA, and OSHA is not a Canadian rulemaking or has any authority in Canada.
That's correct. That's why we bifurcated the national safety call for the United States, and Jeff Norris has one called the Canadian Call to Safety, because we don't want to waste the Canadians' time dealing with OSHA standards that has nothing to do with your provincial requirements up there, brothers and sisters. So that was why we had to put the brakes on this and not call it an international safety call, because we had people scheduling time, and I got calls saying, that was a waste of my time. So that's why I talked to Pete. So I talked to the trustees, and that's when we got those separated, and we have a call for Canadians and their issues and OSHA here in the United States. So hopefully that answers that, Pete.
I believe it does.
Okay, let's go to synthetic slings. Here's a good true and false. Can synthetic slings be used for multiple lift rigging? Vote now. Go ahead. I'm looking at the chat box. Someone say yes or no. Can a synthetic sling be used during or on all 5 pieces of maximum 5 pieces doing multiple lift rigging? Yes or no?
We have 3 yeses so far. 4, 5, 6, 7.
And they're all yeses. Is that correct?
Yes. Everything's a yes.
That's good. I sure am glad I didn't offer pizza. I'd be buying 6 pizzas today, right, Pete? So good job, guys. There is nothing, absolutely nothing that prohibits you to use a synthetic sling doing a multiple lift rigging, as long as it's with the rated capacity and it's in good condition, right? But look at this synthetic sling here that was used. It was damaged, should have been removed from service a long time ago. And some people say, well, I'll remove that synthetic sling whenever I see the red thread in it. Well, guess what? That red thread is not even worthy of waiting to see. That should have been removed from service far before it got to the red thread, nor does a manufacturer have any requirement to put the red thread in there. And the best analogy I can give you is do you guys wait till your light comes on in your pickup truck to say I'm out of oil before you check your oil? So it's kind of like the dummy light on your dashboard. You never wait till you run out of oil to check it. Same thing with these synthetic slings here. Don't wait till you see the red thread, because you're in danger of the thing failing. So it's a fallacy, but yes, you can use multiple lift. You can use synthetic slings. OSHA put out a compliance directive that says you can't. We challenged them on it. We got the synthetic manufacturers all over their butt saying, how dare you cut into my market share and tell people they can't use my product in a safe manner as long as it's being used in accordance with our manufacturer's recommendation, why are you telling all these steel erection companies that they can't use my product, quality product, doing multiple lift rigging? So they quickly backed off, okay? But I had to sick the manufacturers on them, and they rescinded that one. Okay, now we're going to get into 3 basic types of rigging assemblies that can be used. This is a manufactured one where they actually had the wire rope manufacturer. They married 2 eyes together and threw a 5-ton hook in it. It's a dedicated, it's the hook and eye design here that's used only for multiple lift rigging. This is only one way to meet the requirements that we discussed earlier. And here's a better look at it as they're hooking on. You can see the 2 swaged eyes were manufactured together, and they threw a 5-ton hook in there. So it's a dedicated 5-hook multiple lift rigging assembly. But that's only one way to do it. Here's the second way, which is the most common use. It's a detachable bull tail design, where you can put as many bull tails on that hook and put a load on there. And it's better because you don't have to drag around that whole rigging assembly all over the iron pile. It gets snagged up on the flanges of the beam and can pull them over, right? So the detachable bull tail design is probably the most versatile way to do this when you got the bull tails, okay? And this is just a little picture of that. Here's the one where it got out on a job site in New York just last month, and I got 2 calls. And I hope our friends from New York that gave me a call are on the line today. Is they said the general contractor safety guy says that we can only do this if we have 1 line for each piece coming from the headache ball. Not true. That's only one way, and it's the most least desirable way. Just think if you had 5 long slings for 5 pieces, and when you come down to put the first one on, you're going to have rigging equipment all over the iron pile. And that's going to take probably 2 iron workers to clear up the hooks so it doesn't snag stuff and keep pulling beams over. So this is the least desirable method to do it. It still complies, but it creates other hazards when it comes to working in the iron pile and trying to hook on. So this was an issue that helped prompt this call today that happened in upstate New York. So I hope our friends are online today, and I thank them for giving me a call. The next thing about this standard is you have to have training on the hazards and the nature of the hazards associated with multiple lifts and the proper procedures and equipment to perform multiple lifts. So we're going to take a look at those, okay? You have to pre-plan your routes. So routes for suspended loads, you have to pre-plan to ensure that no employee is required to work directly beneath a suspended load, except for, and here's the exceptions that you always got to remember. 1, employees engaged in the initial connection of the steel, and number 2, the employee necessary for hooking and unhooking of the load. So that means your hook-on guys and your connectors are exempt from working beneath a suspended load. All right? That is what the standard says. Anything other than that is incorrect. The next thing is a maximum of 5 pieces. That's what we negotiated. The operating engineers through this whole process were in full support of this because they recognize that operator fatigue plays a factor in crane safety and rigging safety. So the law of averages says this: a crane operator would rather make 100 picks over the job swings with 3 pieces than 300 picks over the job with 1 piece. Jimmy the Greek, the best odds maker in the world, would say that the probability of having an incident of doing it 300 times versus 100 times increases exponentially as time goes on, months and years. So that's why the operating engineers agreed that they would like to do multiple lift rigging because they have less swing time. And we got the pieces right there in the bay where we want to sit them. It just makes sense. And on top of that, if you have a 5-to-1 safety factor, that's an incredible safety factor. Pete, let me ask you a question. What vehicle did you drive to work this morning in?
A Chevy pickup.
Do you think that that Chevy pickup has a 5-to-1 safety factor built in that thing?
Probably not, but I don't know how they would measure that.
It does not. So all the cars that you guys drove to work today, they don't have a 5-to-1 safety factor in them, but the hooks, the shackles, the wire rope slings, the bull tails, the bridle assemblies that are manufactured have a 5-to-1 safety factor. So I have a lot of confidence when I put more than one piece of iron on the hook, Pete, that with a 5-to-1 safety factor, I don't have to worry about failure as long as it's within a rated capacity, right? So that's the best way we can do that. Okay, clearance between members. This is an issue where we've got cited on, and Pete, this is where our employers got cited when they were wrong, okay? Number one, the qualified rigger has to rig it. It has to look something just like you see right here. Each member has to be 7 feet apart. And the 7 feet is not measured from hook to hook, like you see here in the picture. The 7 feet is measured from the top flange of the bottom piece to the bottom flange of the top piece. So it's from iron to iron is where the 7 feet is measured. So if you don't have that, this is where you have it. Here's a good example if you got plenty enough clearance. But look at the very next pick sequence on the very same job. I took this picture, the very next sequence, look what happened. Insufficient clearance. So the question is why? And the answer is because the hook on guy used too long of a sling on this piece here that made Gary, the connector, have to bend down and walk underneath the load. So he needed extra slings here of different lengths so that they could rig it right to make it look like this. So here's the issue. If I could see this from the parking lot, and if Pete could see this at the parking lot when he's dropping off checks or checking in with his superintendent, how easy is it for some general contractor or OSHA guy to see it? Okay. So this is something we got to be very careful of, folks, is clearance and having enough cheap slings on there so that hook on man can take their pick and make sure that they keep that 7 foot between the pieces at all times. Here's a common practice, skipping a hook. If you've only got 2 pieces left on the pick list, why would you want to put them close together when you can put one high and one low? Okay, and this is the manufactured eye and hook design, as you can see here, where they had the 2 eyes manufactured together with a 5-ton hook in there. This is just one contractor that did it this way, but their hook on man was a seasoned person who said, I only got 2 pieces left. I'm gonna hook one high, hook one low, and we don't have to worry about hitting the column tops that you see right here. Smart move, qualified rigger. So now let's get into connector procedures. Pete, are there any questions on multiple lift rigging before we go to the connector procedures? Hello, Pete.
Sorry, I was muted. We do have a question. Someone asked if they seem to bring up a point that wire rope sling, it used to be 5 to 10, not 3 to 6, asking when that was changed.
That was changed about 4 or 5 years ago. And I actually agree with the change. Running ropes are 3 and 6. Standing ropes are 3 and 6. So why shouldn't wire rope slings be 3 and 6, right?
Okay.
So It's
The other one, back to tagline, someone asked if there's hoisting multiple bundles of deck, and or if it's just a single bundle, should it have a tagline?
Well, if you got a single bundle of decking, once again, that's at the discretion of the qualified rigger. How far are they sending it? Are they hoisting that bundle in the blind? Did the guys on top of the building need the tagline to swing it around and land the bundle decking within 1 foot of the bearing surface? So that's up to the discretion of that qualified rigger. They can put one on there if they want to, Pete, but there's nothing that requires that they do. Okay. Now, the issue of hoisting multiple bundles of decking. This is a really contentious issue and area. Decking is a structural component. That's why they call it structural decking, right? Because of the corrugation and the design of it, you pour freaking concrete on it. So decking is considered to be a structural component of the building. True. We got letters from the Steel Deck Institute. We got letters from the American Institute of Steel Construction that decking is a structural component and part of the diaphragm of the building. However, OSHA's taking a position that it's not an I-beam or a similar structural component of framing, and they disregard that being allowed under multiple lift rigging. So here is the backdoor solution. Just like rebar, I mentioned earlier that you can have 3 or 4 bundles of rebar. You can hoist 3 or 4 bundles of decking 2 foot apart if you want and put a tagline on the bottom bundle. Just make sure that no employee is ever working beneath a suspended load of those bundles of decking and you're not in violation of anything. Just make sure that the weight of those 3 or 4 bundles within the rated capacity, okay? So to answer your question, it doesn't really pertain to decking because OSHA doesn't consider decking to be a structural steel beam or similar structural member. But it is a structural component of the building and you can do it outside the multiple lift rigging procedure, provided that no employees are working beneath a suspended load. I hope that answers that question. So let's go on to connector procedures. We fought hard, very hard, and had testimony from 50 to 100 connectors that say, there are many cases where I'm working in the blind and we have boom deflection, we have drift and loads, and there's been many cases where people have been hurt, dismembered, knocked off the iron, or killed, or had near misses because they couldn't get out of the way in time. Because when you're working with phones or working in the blind and that crane operator stops the swing just 2 seconds too late, all of a sudden you got another 5 to 8 feet of drift. And that drift could knock Pete off the iron, okay? And it has. So we had connectors come and testify when we had this negotiated rulemaking to say, give me some discretion. I want to tie off when I need to tie off, but I don't want to tie off and not be able to get out of the way when I need to get out of the way of a load coming at me of 3,000 pounds. So because of that, we have an allowance that between 15 and 30 feet as minimum requirements under OSHA, the connectors, they don't have to be tied off, but you have to be provided with a personal fall arrest system and be able to be tied off. So if you're not wearing a full body harness, if you don't have anywhere to tie off as an anchorage point, you can't comply with the minimum requirements of the standard. So, but you still have requirements for connectors that are subject to hazards more than bolt up guys, plumb up guys, decking guys. you have your own unique hazards pertaining to connecting, okay? And we're gonna go through some of these very quickly. And there's a hell of a lot of them we can't go over today, but they're included in Lee Worley's National Training Fund programs that are available to anybody, okay? So the first thing you want to do to protect your connectors is make sure you get these written requirements from the general contractor that A, you don't have any defective anchor bolts, and if you do, they've been modified under the direction of a structural engineer of record. And number two, you want to protect connectors from structural collapse by making damn sure that you get written notifications that the concrete strength's at least 75% up to strength. Why? We don't want those anchor bolts pulling out of green concrete. And we got another whole module that has horror story pictures in it of green concrete, anchor bolts pulling out or modified. They used epoxy. They didn't put them in right. And guess what happened? The connectors came down with the iron. So if you want to protect connectors and safe procedures for connectors, make sure you don't put them up on the iron until you get these written notifications from the general contractor. They are required to give you written notification, and you're looking at it right here on the screen. It says prior to erecting columns, the controlling contractor has to provide Pete Hayes with written notification of the concrete strength of footing, piers, and walls, okay? And also, all columns have to be anchored by a minimum of 4 anchor bolts. So we're really glad that we got away from those 2 anchor bolt columns, folks, because that was a recipe for structural collapse. So that's one way to protect your connectors. And here is just the standard about the 15 and 30 foot rule.
Steve, along with that, we've got a questions come in here. Someone asked if you can repeat the point about tying off connectors and the allowance for not tying off again.
Okay. I can do that off the top of my head. Connectors between 15 and 30 feet, connectors and only connectors do not have to be tied off between 15 and 30 feet with 2 exceptions, with 2 provisions. Number one, you have to wear a personal fall rest system. Your connectors have to wear a full body harness system. Have to wear a full body harness, and they have to have an anchorage point and be able to tie off. That could be a beamer, that could be a gut line, that could be an overhead line. It could be some way that they could tie off if Pete needs to tie off because he has to reach down in a 3-foot spandrel beam and punch a hole in the bottom of it, and he's going to have to lean over. Well, Pete doesn't want his center of gravity to get out of balance and Pete fall off the iron, right, Pete? So there'll be cases where Pete's going to want to tie off because he knows he's got to lean way over to drive a drift pin or a bolt pin or something to get the hole to line up to get 2 bolts wrenched tight. So to answer your question, between 15 and 30 feet, connectors must be provided with and wear a personal fall arrest system and be able to tie off. And that requires an anchorage point. It's in subpart R, black and white. If you want to call me after this, you can go to the OSHA standards and find it yourself, or you can call me and I'll send it to you.
Steve, I would add to that what I'm seeing out in the world now, most all of your sophisticated general contractors, medium to large size, have gone to 6-foot tie-off rule. Even many owners are promoting that. So I don't see that very much anymore.
Yeah.
But just making other contractors and people on the line aware that more often than not, it's 6 foot. And my company, we've just gone to 6 foot across the board on all situations. So,
and that's a good thing. It's those schools and little warehouses and a lot of the small contractors that are only bidding to the minimum requirements that don't have those policies. It's not in a contract. They need to know at least what the minimum standards are, right? And that's the minimum standards for protection, the minimum.
Correct.
But you, Pete, even though you have a 6-foot rule, you still have to make sure that you don't have excessive free fall distance and your people fall tied off and hit the deck below, right?
That is correct. Yep.
So Pete has to plan for truly what's 100% fall protection. And that gets into this whole other foreman fall protection training course that we're putting on throughout the United States right now as a pilot program. Why? Because there's a big false sense of security. Oh, I have a 6-foot rule, tie-off rule. I tie off at 6 feet. Well, I've gone to a lot of these job sites and they have excessive free fall distance. If they were to fall, they're going to get impaled on things below them. They're going to hit the deck. But oh yeah, they'll be tied off, but they're going to be hitting the deck. So you got to be really careful, like Pete does, to make damn sure that if you say you're going to tie off at 6 foot, you can't free fall more than 9 feet. You have to come to a complete stop within 9.5 feet. You can't strike anything below you, and you have to minimize those fall risk forces on the body to 1,800 pounds and less. Okay, so those are things that Pete and others that have gone to 6 foot, they've got to plan for. Okay, and make sure that their foreman people execute it in the field. Okay.
That's right. Another quick question. Someone is asking if connector training is something that's taught in the regular apprenticeship, or is there separate training for that at the hall? While Lee isn't on the phone with us, I'm sure you can answer it. And I know, at least in the areas I'm familiar with, it is something that's taught in the apprenticeship curriculum.
Yes, it is, and it's in the manual. We have written manuals with, like this is one of the pictures that's in the manual. The pictures that you're seeing here today came straight out of the National Training Fund manuals. Okay, so. And once again, these systems have to be installed by a qualified person, not a competent person, not a certified person, but a qualified person that's been trained on how to install these systems, whether they're horizontal lifelines, whether they're stanchion posts, or whatever.
So we got another, a really good real world question here.
Okay.
Can a connector get on a beam while trying to connect the piece without any bolts installed in it yet? So basically a piece that's floating on the hook and they're trying to work it in there. Can they get on or sit on that beam without any bolts installed?
Well, they would have to have 2 slings on it because it'd be a teeter-totter, and once they stepped on it, they would flop like this, right?
Sure.
So let's assume that Pete, or that this person is going to make the point, and he's going to put 2 bolts in one end, just keep it really loose, and then he's going to cross the iron, and it's still suspended from the load like you see right here in this picture, okay? Let's say this guy has 2 bolts in one end and they're loose, and he's traversing this piece, and yet it's still suspended from the crane. So the question is can I get on a structural beam that's still suspended by the crane? Is that a fair question?
It is.
Okay.
It is the question, and I think the answer is no, because it's you're riding the load.
No, Pete, this is the first time I've ever known you where you were wrong.
Uh-oh.
Pete, first time. I won't ask you for a pizza, but here's the answer. That is not riding the load. It's been adjudicated in 2 jurisdictions, one in Ohio under federal OSHA that tried to say, oh, you can't get on this piece of iron because it's a suspended load and you're riding a load. And we said, BS, we have to put 2 bolts in it. It's not going anywhere. And it's called positioning. And we got to get to the other side to connect the piece. And it's not riding the load. The riding the load is that if Pete gets on it and I swing you across or I elevate you up 30, 40 feet, that's riding the load. But when I got that beam between 2 columns and I got 2 bolts with a full nut on it and it's still loose, and I start crossing that beam to get to the other end, that is not riding the load.
However, the question was no bolts.
Well,
the questioner asked the question with no bolts at all.
Well, no, hell no.
Of course, yep. So that was the question, though. No bolts.
So the answer is hell no. Who would want to get on a beam that is going to teeter totter, and the minute you sit on it, it's going to flip up and you're going to slide down like a instantly.
Sure, and that's why the question I said was a good real world question, because
Yeah.
that has been done, that has happened.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
So the answer is a no.
So in the case of Ohio, the judge ruled in favor of the steel erector that is not riding the load, OSHA. That's positioning, and you can't do steel erection. It's not riding. In fact, the crane operator dogged it off, got it close until the connector got to his work point, and then they can position it and get up on it a little bit till they can stab that spud wrench in there and make, right? So that is not riding the load. So we won the case in Ohio with soft co-erectors was the case. The same thing happened with Dave McEwen in California with California Rectors. I don't know if Dave or anyone from Cal Rectors is on there, but a state plan tried to cite them for the same thing. So I got a copy of the case from Federal OSHA in Ohio, gave it to Dave McEwen. Dave gave it to his attorneys. They submitted it to the judge for summary judgment. The judge said, this has already been decided. Case dismissed. So now we've won in both federal OSHA and state OSHA cases that in the case of putting 2 bolts in and traversing the beam to get to the other side is in fact not riding the load. So are we clear on that?
Yeah, I believe we are. So no bolts or spuds only is you cannot get on the piece. Bolts on one end, you can cross the piece.
Correct. Now here's a case that's an unsafe practice. I don't know about you, Pete. You're a hell of a lot more agile than I am, but I wouldn't want to try to walk across a beam that's suspended from the crane, 2 bolts loose with bent plate on it, where you got to keep your feet straight in front of each other and try to walk to the other end. If that thing bobbles, that connector could come toppling off there. So this is a case where our connectors really need to step down, walk the bottom of the flange of the beam, because it still has movement, okay? So it's a safe practice that's required by the standard, the hazards and safe practices associated with connecting. Another thing is leaving loose stuff all over the iron. How many times, Pete, have people grabbed the column, stepped around it, only to put their foot on a bullpen, a bolt, a nut, a washer, and all of a sudden they slip, and the slip contributes to a fall, okay? And we've had connectors do that before. So these are just some of the common sense things that we see out there. Then we come to double connections, and I need to ask the crowd, how many people have fabricated double connections over column webs, and they send out a barrel full of lugs that you have to field bolt in the field before standing up the column? So I wanted to ask the crowd there, if any of you, the fabricator, will punch an extra set of holes in the column web, but they'll send you out a barrel full of lugs that you have to field bolt on. How many cases of that are we seeing? We still see them because I get calls about it. But this is what you call a live double connection that's contributed to a hell of a lot of structural collapse and fatalities. And there's not one local union across the United States that hasn't lost a double connection that was designed and erected just like what you're seeing right here. Why? Because you have to take all the bolts loose, stick your spud wrench in there like you see on the right, and then you have to horse this beam in over there without the other beam coming loose and the panel opening up and collapsing. So that's why we have the standard that requires double connections to be fabricated with an offset hole or a seat lug to make sure that the first piece doesn't come loose and cause structural collapse. But it's on the erector's back that if they fabricate and design this with a seat lug, Pete, your guys better put those seat lugs on there when those columns are laying on horizontally on the ground and bolt them in there however they want to do it before they stand them up, okay? And I've been to several job sites where there's been a barrel full of seat lugs, full of water, all rusty, and they erected row after row after row of live double connections and didn't take the time to put bolt on the seat lug. So that's a
That's
problem.
something that I think everyone should address in their erection plan and in their pre-task, pre-job planning.
I agree.
If you've got people that aren't putting those lugs on, which typically we're seeing a separate row of bolts, calling them OSHA holes.
Yeah.
But that's somebody not practicing good planning procedures, certainly if you're seeing that.
Yeah. And it's okay if the fabricator says, okay, I gave you an extra set of holes, but you got to put seat lugs. That's okay. Because it allows for seat lugs, but you have the duty to put them on. That's the point we're trying to make.
Yep.
The next hazard to connectors are these damn shear studs. And I need to ask the audience, how many people still get beams with shear studs that are shop fabricated to the top flange of the beam? How many? I'm not talking about the bent plate that you see in the left-hand picture here side. I'm talking about field beams with shear studs that have been shop fabricated and shipped to the job, where your connectors and everyone else has to work around and walk around these things 8 hours a day. That's a complete violation of the standard. And
we're getting plenty of people that are saying they're still seeing it from time to time.
Well, you tell those people on the line that they'll call me and tell me about this, that I would really appreciate it, because they did this on a major 18-story building for an insurance company. They fabricated 18 floors of beams with 2 rows of shear studs on them, and we called them out on it. And guess what this major insurance company did? They did the right thing. They footed the bill. Actually, they told the general contractor who authorized this to be done, they had to pay for our ironworkers to retrofit 18 floors of ironing, cut off the shear studs, grind them off, set the iron, put the decking down, and then shoot the studs down after the metal decking has been laid. That's what the standard requires. So that general contractor, and I won't name them, boy, did they learn a costly lesson, because they had to clear out the hall to retrofit all these beams. And it's because of the tripping hazard that we saw fatalities happening, folks. The connectors were tripping from their pants, from their Carhartts, from their harnesses, from their lanyards, were catching up on these shear studs. And it wasn't a lack of fall protection. It was tripping on these damn shear studs. That was the primary causation factor. So that's why we have this OSHA standard here that says that you cannot fabricate beams with shear studs on the top flange. It's called the tripping hazard standard under subpart R. So if you want to protect connectors, tell them never make a piece. If you see a truckload of iron show up and no one knows about it and they got shear studs all over the top flanges of those beams, you tell them to call the office. Okay. All right. Anything else on connector procedures?
So we have
we
did have a question, and because you were in Senrac, I think you can answer this one well. What is the importance of the 15 to 30 foot rule for connectors? Why not 10 or some other number? How did that 15 to 30 come about?
The 15 to 30 contemplates the design of multi-tiered buildings that are typically 13.6 to 14.6 in height. Typically on a hotel, on a common building, Pete, and you know this, when you design and erect high-rise buildings, a 40-story building with 2-story columns, the typical height is 13.6 to 14.6 from floor to floor. So that arose from the 15-30 foot rule, was based on the fact of common design of multi-tiered buildings that are 30 foot or less that are erected with 2-story columns, and therefore you got the 15 and 30-foot rule and the exemption for connectors between that distance. It's based on a typical design, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
And then two questions, basically both the same. They're both asking, what about studs on vent plates that are horizontal that stick out, as your one picture showed? How are we viewing that?
Okay, I can answer that really quick. And it's right here. If that shear stud on that bent plate projects vertically from or horizontally across the top flange of that beam, it's prohibited. In this case, it is. You see how that shear stud is coming across the top plane and the top flange of that beam? That would be a violation of the standard. But if that bent plate is 12 to 16 to 18 inches, the curb stop that comes out, and you have a 4-inch shear stud, and that horizontal shear stud is not projecting across the top flange of the beam, it is not a violation of the standard. It's only a violation if that shear stud projects vertically from or horizontally across the top flange of that beam. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
I hope that answers his question. So, all right, let's go down. If there's any other questions, let me know. Now we're getting down to control decking zones. Okay. You see the picture on the left, folks? You know the question that you asked earlier, Pete, about can you hoist more than one bundle of decking? In this case, you can see they've got 2 bundles of decking with 2 sets of slings on them that they took from the truck about 26 floors below, and they brought them from the truck. They're landing them on the erection floor in a correct place where it's been fully bolted and welded and shored up. But they're hoisting more than one bundle. They're just stacking them one on top, and then they'll move that top piece. They'll unhook one set of these slings, and then they'll take that other bundle and they'll send it to some other place on the erection floor where they need to put that bundle of decking. So here's just a case on the left where, yeah, you can lift more than one bundle of decking. So, and that's the way they did it. So here we are in controlled decking zones, okay? And this is one of them that requires special retraining. Here it says controlled decking zones. Where CDZs are being used, the employer shall ensure each employee has been provided training on the following areas. The same wording on multiple lift rigging, the same wording on connector procedures, the nature of hazards associated with work within a controlled decking zone, and the establishment, access, and proper installation techniques and work practices, okay? It's common sense stuff. And I have to tell you, decking is one of our Ironworker deadly dozen hazards, folks, okay? Decking is something that no one likes to spread all day. Decking is something where you lay it and people will walk through a decked area that hasn't been tacked down. The sheets can separate, and there's cases where they shouldn't even be in that area. So we're going to talk about this. And here is the requirement. If you establish a controlled decking zone, the employer shall ensure that each affected employee has been provided training, okay? So here's the definition of a controlled decking zone. And it gets misused with precast concrete and subpart M and what they call a controlled access zone, okay? That's under subpart M. It deals with precast concrete erection and other stuff. It has nothing to do with decking in a controlled decking zone. So here it is. A controlled decking zone means an area established specifically for the initial placement and securing of metal decking where access to the area is restricted and work may take place without the use of a personal fall rest system. So there you go, guys. You can rough lay deck without a personal fall rest system, provided you do specific things, okay? And we'll take a look at that. Limited access. We found out that many people that were falling in places in decking that had no business of being there. So when you rough lay a deck, you square it up and you tack it and you keep everyone the hell out of there that shouldn't be in there. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. So the controlled decking zone, Pete, it has to be limited to that area where metal decking is being initially installed and forms the leading edge work. So if you and I are breaking those bundles, Pete, rough laying it, no one else needs to be in there, okay? And here's a case, Pete, where they had 100% tie off and they put beam stanchions in there so that the iron worker on each end of that sheet is tied off in that horizontal lifeline. So this would be a case where it could be red cedar here doing this and following your policy, right? So competent person. The implementation of a controlled decking shall be under the supervision of a competent person, someone that has the authority to say, stay out, do this, don't do that. And you can see in this picture on the right here, if you don't get your lap splices, and this is one of the common hazards and safe practices, you got to get your male and female lap splices to get them interlocked so that sheet doesn't open up when Pete and I are carrying those sheets across the deck. If they're not interlocked, they could slide open and either Pete or me or both of us could slide right through it, right, Pete? So we got to get our endos and we got to get our lap splices. And then we got to square it up and then we need to tack it down. And we'll get into tacking it down here shortly. So here it is, another more clarified illustration. Each employee working at leading edge in a controlled decking zone shall be protected from falls of more than 2 floors or 30 feet, whichever is less, by use of a personal fall rest system. So here are 2 guys at the very, very leading edge with a couple floors below them that they pre-planned. They had the retractable lanyards used correctly in a vertical plane overhead to where they could do this work, cut it in using a hot saw, and not have any fall hazards. Here's another problem we run into with people doing detailed work, flashing work in areas that they should have never been in there. This is unauthorized access in a controlled decking zone. They rough laid it, then all of a sudden the detail guy wants to come in there and do his flashing, and he's working with exposed floor openings. He had no business of being in there, and he's in complete violation of the standard. And there's nothing I can do for you if you call me and you get cited if this was your employee. I would say beg for mercy. Okay. Now, people say, well, how do you define a controlled decking zone? Well, it has to be designed by a control line or means that restricts access. That's pretty broad, wouldn't you agree? It gives you a lot of latitude, Pete, and other employers to define a controlled decking zone using a control line or other means just to restrict access, okay? And you got to erect them not less than 6 feet from the unprotected side or edge. Basic meat and potatoes stuff. And here's the boundaries. Boundaries of a controlled decking zone shall be designated and clearly marked. The CDZ shall not be more than 90 feet wide and 90 feet deep from any leading edge. So if you think you're going to deck something the size of a football field and worry about it later, you're not complying with the standard. So here it is here. During the decking, final adjustments are being met. You can't have any more than 3,000 square feet of an area of deck completed without a safety deck attachment. So what's a safety deck attachment? A safety deck attachment is either spot welding it like you're seeing here, using a mechanical screw. If they don't let you spot weld it, and you actually have to use those powder actuated fasteners to fasten it down, you have to do something to put a minimum of 2 attachments per sheet to keep it from moving around. Okay, it just makes sense. And this is the falls through that we looked at a minute ago, is part of your hazards and safe practice to never leave sheets like you see right here. Okay, these guys are carrying that sheet from right to left, and they're going to step on that sheet, and if that thing opens up, that guy is going to go in the hole if it slides. But I was standing there right there taking a picture, and that's why the guy took his pliers out of his back pocket, picked it up, pulled it back, and stomped on it to get that male and female connection to interlock so it would not slide. Okay. Now, here's a case where they put the decking down so long ago it rusted. They got guys in there putting flashing on, and they never even put up any perimeter safety cables. You see the yellow circle there with the hole in there? The contractor, like Pete, talked to the fabricator, had all the holes punched at the top for the top safety cable and one at the midspan, but it didn't do Pete any good when his guys disregarded that, didn't put in the cables, laid the decking down, left it there for a month. Then they told their guys to put in the flashing before they even put up the safety cable. And this is a case where we got cited, and they gave me a call, and I said, surrender. I had no defense on this, none. I had no way to fight. If I could have fought, I would have fought, but my hands were tied because of this situation. So let's talk about exposed floor openings. When you have an exposed floor opening, you just can't leave it. The standard says all floor opening covers must be covered. It doesn't say 15 feet or 30 feet, folks. You create a floor opening, you have to cover it. There is no trigger height for a floor opening. And even though they left that sheet out, and you can see the LN3 welding machine down there at the end of that hole, they had to leave the sheet out because the guy needs to get in there and weld, then they need to inspect it. That's all common stuff. But you got to keep everyone off of that deck, and you really need to use the cone and bar system, which we can't talk about today, to keep people away from accidentally stepping into that exposed floor opening. Even though that floor hasn't been turned over to the general contractor yet, your own employees could accidentally not see it and get to talking and walk right in that damn floor opening, because it has happened time and time again. So floor openings is one of the deadly dozen hazards. So you use common planking or whatever you got to use on elevator shafts, whatever, to cover those holes. So folks, that's it on these 3 activities that require special training requirement. If you don't have your employees trained on that, get a hold of the National Training Fund, your local apprenticeship coordinator. Make sure that your employees that perform these 3 activities have it on their apprenticeship tracking system card, that they have in fact received training on multiple lift rigging, connector procedures, and control decking zones. And then I can fight for you, and I will. But if you don't, then I can't fight. So Pete, that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I wanted to see if there's any more questions on any of these 3 subjects from any of our folks.
There actually are here. We've got one that pertains to training. Someone's asking, does someone, well, let me get this right here, to work in a controlled deck zone, do they need training above and beyond what they got in a current apprenticeship training program?
No, because the apprenticeship program has a module 7, the installation of floor and roof openings, module 7, because I wrote it. Okay.
Got it.
There's a specific module on decking and controlled decking zones, and you guys only saw a few pictures that were excerpts from this big fat manual that has a PowerPoint and actually a video with it. and also test questions. So take advantage of it, get a hold of your apprenticeship coordinator, and make sure you're documented, okay, to protect yourself in the ring at all times so you don't get knocked out.
Yeah, and another person's asked if Subpart R, Subpart R does cover everything we've discussed today.
Yes, sir.
And our training programs are world class, and they cover all components of Subpart R.
They do. They just don't cover these left field things coming from these people that are making up stuff. And that's why I talked with you, Pete, why we had to go over some of the stuff today to make sure everyone's house is in order and to be aware of those young safety people that are coming up through the ranks. And I want to be real clear. I'm not questioning their heart, okay? I'm not questioning that they want people to be safe and not get hurt. I'm not questioning that. What I am questioning is their understanding of these standards and how they try to address this on Pete's job or your job or anyone else's job. And that's where we've gotten screwed up, and it's cost guys like Pete $30,000, $50,000 real quick because some young safety person got it wrong, okay? Then they call OSHA, and OSHA gets it wrong about 8 out of 10 times. But I want to protect Pete, the Pete's of the world. If I knew the rest of you contractors, I'd say you too. So I'll help every one of you. And Pete's called me before on projects in Texas and other places. And if you call me, I'll help you out too. But we got to keep our house in order. And here's the last thing. You guys need to read Subpart R over and over and over again. You should know that as good as you know those blueprints that you're bidding off of, okay? You got to know this better than the GC safety people, the project owner safety people, because that's where you got to stand your ground in the ring. You got to know the standards, and you got to know the preamble. If there's any question, go to the preamble to Subpart R, which is a document that OSHA has on their website. That's an explanation of 1926 761 C1, C2, and C3. They explain it in a few paragraphs.
Steve, can you go to the page that has your contact info? Several people are asking for that. Can you show that page? Leave it there. Perfect. That is your email. People, we've got multiple have asked for that. We also have someone who's looking for this topic for Canada. So,
oh, really?
Yep. So that's twice now we've had
okay.
We've had that. Bridget, and I'm pretty sure it's Bridget from Amaret here in Minneapolis, has offered, she's going to be emailing you something that she's made up regarding controlled deck zones that she thinks would be good to share with the group. So
I instructed
her to go ahead and email that to you, then that can be shared. And everyone who's wondering, all of our Impact Ironworker safety calls are available for viewing, going way back 3 years ago when we started this, on the Impact website, right on the home front page. They're there for your use. So go ahead, and this one will be up as soon as Christy can get it put up.
This is the safety department, folks, and Jeff Norris, you see there, he covers all across Canada. He has administrative help through Sandy there. Christy in the dead center there supports all of us. Wayne is a district safety rep based out of Ohio, and we all travel like a tramp on a train. We are everywhere, but give us a call at this number and we'll come running. So I'm going to stop share screen here. And Christy, can you come on the line for a second? Where are you? There she is. I just wanted you folks to know that that wasn't a fake cyborg picture taken off the internet, that there really is a Christy Rose that works for the safety department, and there she is. And she does a great job in supporting us and getting stuff out, e-blast, emails, responses, notifications. She does a lot for us, and I can't say enough about the administrative help that she does to help all of us, and helps Pete too, right, Pete?
That is correct. Yep. I want to thank her for all she does. Thank you, Steve, for all you do to keep ironworkers safe and keep us all being the best in the industry.
Well, that's all I got, Pete, unless there's any final questions.
I don't believe we have any. We didn't as of a minute ago. Anyone who has a question that maybe didn't get answered or was working in the chat room, feel free to reach out to Steve. He'll be happy to answer questions via email especially. And again, we thank you all for your time, and we look forward to getting together again here very soon. Everyone be safe. Take care.
Thank you, Pete, for your time. Take care.